I feel like this is the last day of what sounds like it's been a fantastic couple of days. So thank you for the invitation to speak and to join you as you move into some of the concluding phases of the discussions. So I've been asked to talk about the question of South Africa and whether and how it's living up to its promise. And what I really want to focus on is the US government role in that space. So how are we engaging with and in South Africa to do just that? I want to share some of the foreign policy framework that we're working from, which really informs our thinking and our activities, and also how we're advancing our agenda through really broad multi-sectoral engagement. I want to share with you some of the challenges that we see, but also some of the opportunities we see for investors here in South Africa. And finally, I want to talk a little bit about optimism, how our engagement and optimism, which probably many of you share, how this can unlock and fuel South Africa's full potential so that it does truly live up to its promise, which continues to inspire so many around the world. There's no denying that the last year has seen significant shifts in the political landscapes of both our countries. It's been a year of significant transition in the United States and also a tumultuous period here in South Africa. But some things, I would argue some of the most important things, remain consistent. The US and South Africa share a complex and interwoven history. We share a love for our democracies, and I am honored to speak, to really have the opportunity, sir, to address these issues in front of you. We also have an understanding that democracies can sometimes be messy. But the friendship our two nations have built over the years between our governments, but also crucially, between our businesses, our civic organizations, our educational institutions, and our citizens, those relationships endure. So in that context, I think it's useful for me to offer some updates on our foreign policy approach from the new administration towards Africa, which informs much of our approach here in South Africa. Just 2 weeks ago in Washington, Secretary Tillerson hosted an African summit. 24 ministers from across the continent were there, and it was really about getting their input on how the US can broaden and deepen relationships across the continent. The discussions highlighted the need to transform Africa for the future, and there is no doubt that this continent will transform and will change. Forecasts predict that by 2050, Africa will have a population of 2.5 billion people. That's twice as many people as today. It would be the most populous continent on Earth. Manufacturing output from the continent will also double from the current 500 billion to over 1 trillion if estimates hold. Forecasts finally envision that 25% of the world's labor force will be African. Anticipating these developments, we want to continue to work with our African partners to promote economic development that will provide the jobs needed for this growing population. With 70% of the population under the age of 30, ensuring employment is critical for both economic development and also for security. The new administration's policy framework will be guided by 4 strategic principles: advancing peace and security, countering the scourge of terrorism, increasing economic growth and investment, and promoting democracy and good governance. US firms have been at the forefront of investment in Africa, and this I expect to continue. Secretary Tillerson said at the Washington meeting 2 weeks ago, in 2016, US direct investment in Africa grew to $57.5 billion, the highest level to date. Americans are making investments, however, not only in the production of goods, but also in activities that promote growth in education, health, and energy, all consistent with Africa's development goals. So how do we advance these broader policy goals for the continent closer to home here in South Africa? As in the United States, we know the success of the private sector is critical to the economic development of South Africa. Increasing trade and investment is an indispensable key to creating jobs and sustaining economic growth. That's why, on a daily basis, my colleagues at the U.S. mission, whether in Pretoria, Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, we are working at all levels of the South African government and with U.S. companies and South African companies to promote U.S. business activities in South Africa. There are roughly 600 U.S. companies already here, either operating in South Africa or using it as a platform for broader regional activities. These companies account for some 10% of South Africa's GDP and employ well over 200,000 South Africans. In addition, U.S. direct investment in South Africa is over $5 billion, but we see room for more. There's one U.S. company, in fact, that alone will account for 1.3% of South Africa's GDP this year. And that company, I'm happy to say, just announced a major new investment here last month. U.S. and South African companies could all do even more with better infrastructure, and we'd like to see improvements to roads, railroads, rolling stock, and ports. These improvements would lower transportation costs, benefiting both consumers and producers. We'll continue to engage on this issue on the policy front, encouraging national and local government actors to move in this direction. We're drawing from the U.S. government on a variety of resources, including from the U.S. Agency for International Development, or USAID. USAID is working to mobilize private capital for development priorities. Through our partial guarantees with ABSA, Barclays, Cadiz, and the IDC, we've partnered to increase available credit for SMEs, microfinance, and renewable energy projects by approximately $270 million in South Africa. USAID's partnership with the National Association of Securities Professionals, or NASP, some of whom I think are here today. NASP is a pension association that represents over $4 trillion. This connection between USAID and NASP helps bridge the gap between U.S. pension capital and investment opportunities here in Southern Africa. More and more, we are aligning our development priorities with the private sector's commercial interests, raising awareness of investment opportunities, lowering transaction costs, and mitigating investment risk. In a similar vein, our development finance institution, which many of you know, OPIC, or the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, has a portfolio of some 12 funds investing in sub-Saharan Africa, including in South Africa. The total capitalization of these funds is $5.6 billion, and OPIC's aggregate commitment is $939 million. These funds have helped mobilize, more importantly, an additional $4.5 billion in a wide variety of sectors: healthcare, telecoms, low-income housing, power, financial services, and logistics. This OPIC seed capital sends a message to the markets that there are good, high-reward investment opportunities on the continent. With respect to our efforts on trade, we continue to promote the goals of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, AGOA. AGOA has been the cornerstone of U.S. economic engagement in Africa since 2000. In 2015, the U.S. Congress extended the mandate of AGOA for another 10 years. AGOA is a uniquely American contribution to economic development, not just in South Africa, but across the continent. Last year, under AGOA, South Africa exported $1.5 billion worth of goods to the U.S. In fact, South Africa is the single largest exporter of goods under AGOA. Beyond this, though, AGOA has helped to bring the U.S. and South Africa closer together, motivating our governments and the private sector to expand economic activity to enjoy the benefits that come from increased trade and investment between our two countries. We would love to see increase in South Africa's taking advantage of the benefits of AGOA. AGOA is creating opportunities for South Africans and also helping Americans to obtain access to South African goods and services, stimulating across the board additional bilateral trade and investment. Of note, AGOA has also led to the creation of tens of thousands of jobs here in South Africa. Beyond our policy advocacy and engagement with the private sector, the U.S. is advancing our goals by investing in the long-term education, professional development, and health of South Africa's workforce and its next generation of leaders. For decades, the U.S. has provided leadership training and educational exchange programs to promote mutual understanding and develop the skills and leadership capacity of South Africa's promising youth. This investment has paid huge dividends, and we are confident will continue to do so in the future. South Africa needs jobs, and South Africa needs good jobs. These programs help to lay the foundation that will allow South Africans to develop those jobs. In turn, that creates opportunities for investors and markets, including for U.S. producers and service providers. A crucial investment that we are making here is in the health sector. South Africa struggles with one of the highest burdens of HIV/AIDS in the world. For over a decade, the U.S. has stood shoulder to shoulder with the South African government through PEPFAR to combat the HIV/AIDS epidemic. We've provided more than $5.6 billion, that's 76.5 billion rand, to support South Africa and save countless lives. There's still significant work to be done in order to reach epidemic control, but we are already helping South Africans lead longer and healthier lives. That means they're living to their full potential and contributing to their communities and workforces throughout the country. Without a doubt, South Africa has been an attractive destination for American and international investors for years. But there's also some reluctance. If you pick up a local newspaper on any given day, you'll see headlines about uncertainty. Where's the country headed? What's happening with economic policies and political decision-making? For many investors, decisions are on hold as they wait to see what will happen just next week at the ANC conference, who will be elected to lead the ANC. Some of the credit rating agencies are also watching and waiting to see what happens in December and then the February budget. That uncertainty tends to put a brake on investing. A country's bond rating status affects not only the terms of what the costs are for government borrowing, but it also impacts how investors view the investment climate. The remedy is, it's hard for potential investors to ignore what they read about allegations of state capture, corruption, mismanagement, especially in the major state-owned enterprises. Rising debt obligations of these SOEs and for the government can discourage investors. The remedy is clear. Prompt plans to address these challenges would certainly attract investment. Transparent and best value procurement policies would help ensure taxpayer funds are spent on projects that provide the maximum benefits to South Africa. We also believe that in these transparent processes, U.S. firms would be competitive in showcasing quality products and services that they provide. There are some specific sectors where we see great promise, and particularly where we see U.S.-South Africa complementarity. In those sectors, we believe greater engagement by both government and the private sector could really help South Africa to unlock the potential that will allow the country to stimulate economic growth and create jobs. The energy sector in particular, we see great potential for U.S. export of LNG to South Africa, generating greater power efficiencies and cleaner energy consumption. The U.S. Power Africa program, which some of you may know, brings together finance, technical, and legal experts, as well as the private sector and governments from around the world. Power Africa brings them together to work in partnership to increase the number of Africans with access to power. In South Africa, a number of U.S. companies are particularly involved in the renewable sector. To that end, we hope we'll see progress from the government of South Africa to sign and to implement the independent power producers' power purchase agreements. Our Secretary of Energy, Secretary Perry, was here, in fact, at the Westin just in October, and we had very positive, productive conversations with the government, but we'd really, really like to see progress on that. U.S. energy companies have been mainstays in the sector here for years, and there's a real foundation and a real basis for moving forward and really growing the sector. We also see opportunities in ICT. South Africa's transition from analog to digital presents opportunities. We'd like to see the transition move more quickly. That will really enable South Africa to capture the benefits in cloud services, data processing centers, e-services, and e-commerce. Additionally, in the tech space, I'm always so impressed with South Africa's SKA, the Square Kilometre Array. This is an international scientific project that's based here in South Africa. In South Africa, when complete, it will be the world's largest radio telescope, covering a square kilometer of collecting area to explore the origins of the universe. To put it in perspective, its image resolution will be 50 times better than that of the Hubble Space Telescope. It will enable scientists to monitor the sky in unprecedented detail and survey the entire sky thousands of times faster than any system currently in existence. This will create opportunities for academic and scientific exchange for South Africa and the rest of the world. It will also produce big data, volumes in excess of the current global internet traffic. The so what isn't only about the pure science. That big data will generate a need for new chips and other data technology with innumerable applications and benefits. And that's happening in South Africa, but on the basis of international partnership. Finally, we all know that firms with access to finance have higher growth and employment rates than firms without it. Access to private capital increases investment. We see African entrepreneurs here working on the cutting edge of innovation, but they need linkages to global investors, know-how, and markets. FDI can harness the creative potential of the large youth cohort by opening markets and creating jobs. So as I look out and I see an audience full of people interested in South Africa, probably a mix of long-term friends and investors, and maybe some would-be investors, I think I'm in pretty good company amongst those who share my optimism for this country. South Africa has made great strides and has a strong foundation. I am convinced that South Africa's challenges are our challenges, its opportunities are our opportunities, and its goals are our goals. That's why we at the U.S. mission here are so motivated to engage broadly, as we do in South Africa. It's because we know that by overcoming the challenges and supporting South Africa's efforts to achieve its goals, we are helping to unlock the potential that will allow this truly spectacular country to live up to its promise. We do it because we know it makes both the U.S. and South Africa stronger. I hope you agree, and I look forward to your joining us in the effort to foster a more secure, democratic, and prosperous South Africa. Thank you.